report is out in Canada and it is an absolute disaster, but that is not what the mainstream media is telling you. Let's get into this. And before I start, guys, every time I come into these reports with an open mind thinking maybe we're just having a strong economy, and then you look into the nuances and it's far from the truth. So anyway, labor market gains 41,000 jobs in Canada, supports Bank of Canada holding rates for longer. Isn't that funny how it supports them in what they're trying to do? Not coincidence at all that this is happening, and the data, when you get into it, when you get into the nuances we're going to do, it just really doesn't support them holding rates anyways. But anyway, let's continue on here. So Canada's labor market added a net 40,700 jobs in February, and the unemployment rate edged up to 5.8%. We can guess why that is. Population growth, probably. While the gain was more than the addition of 20,000 jobs economists expected, Canada's surging population growth has outpaced the increase in employment, resulting in a rise in the unemployment rate. Statistics Canada noted that the unemployment rate has held relatively steady in recent months, staying at 5.8% in the last 3 of 4 months. February increase in jobs was driven by a rise in full-time work, with 70,600 jobs added, while part-time employment fell by 29,900. And we're going to get into the nuance in a second, so hold on there. So the Bank of Canada made it clear that it's not ready to cut rates yet. Today's labor market report won't sway this stance, TD economist James Orlando wrote. Isn't it interesting, guys, when you really think about what's going on? We just went through that delinquency report literally yesterday. And does that support the Bank of Canada and what they're doing? I don't know. I mean, their core mission apparently is to maintain monetary stability, and the banking system looks like it's really on edge, and we're going to be covering something else tomorrow. So stay tuned to that and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. So anyway, we're going to get into what actually happened. I'll just show you on a chart what's going on with the unemployment rate. You can see it is up. If you put it on a 5-year chart, doesn't look like by much, but if you put it on a 1-year chart, you can see how it's increased. We went down here in January to 5.7. Now we're back up at 5.8%. So despite all that full-time work gain, which we'll get onto a second why that happened, you've still got the unemployment rate going up because the population growth and the immigration nightmare. We're just doing a disservice to all the people who come to this country and can't get a job. So anyway, labor force survey, February 2024. This is direct from Statistics Canada. I'll link it in the description. Employment rose by 41,000 in February. The employment rate fell by 0.1 percentage points to 61.5% as population growth plus 0.3% continued to outpace employment growth 0.2%. And you'll see exactly what's happening when it comes to weekly earnings, which are really starting to get under pressure a little bit now, and they're starting to come down, which is showing the cracks in the labor market. Obviously, if people can't get the rises that they thought anymore, then guess what? That means the labor market just isn't so amazing as once predicted. And if you put on a 5-year chart, it's come down a lot. It's kind of went down, hit a low in May 2023 of 1.8%, and think about where inflation was back then. Again, negative, and that's just a completely false number of inflation, as we've discussed many times on this channel. But anyway, let's take a look at what happened across the provinces here. So Alberta actually had a big gain, but it wasn't enough to offset the massive population growth. So again, they're at 6.2% unemployment, Saskatchewan at 5%, BC at 5.2%, Manitoba at 4.5%, Ontario at 6.5%, believe it or not, Quebec at 4.7%. You've got the Atlantic provinces, New Brunswick at 6.9%, Nova Scotia at 6%, down 1% just this month, PEI at 7%, Newfoundland and Labrador at 10.2%. Yeah, absolutely crazy. So now let's get into the breakdown of what's going on here, but so you can actually understand this a little bit more, because we need to know the nuances of this report. So anyway, let's first break it down by class of worker, as we always do. This time, I'm not so much going to focus on the month-to-month numbers. I'm going to focus on the year-over-year numbers, because I've realized that really focusing on those month-to-month numbers, there's a lot of noise, guys. And basically, this gives you a better picture, a more stable picture of what's going on if you look over the year-over-year. So if you look at public sector employees, for example, this month alone, public sector employees rose 18,800. And look at private sector employees, down again again 16,400. And this is something we've constantly been seeing on this channel and talking about, how public sector jobs continue to go up whilst private sector jobs come back down. And now the self-employment one, I might have an answer for this actually. Self-employment actually went up a lot as well. If you look, it actually put the year-over-year number in positive territory just by this one number, went up 38,300. But what could also fall into that class of worker is gig work. Things like Uber, DoorDash, Skip the Dishes, these jobs that really pay nothing, and these people unfortunately are wage slaves in those jobs. But I guarantee you we're seeing a surge in the amount of people going into this gig work industry because they can't find work in the normal traditional avenues that we will go through. I mean, we've seen the unemployment lines all over Twitter, everywhere, at fairs in Calgary, Toronto, Montreal. You're seeing all these lines for very low-skilled entry-level jobs. So obviously, if there's lines like that for entry-level jobs, we know something is badly going wrong in the labor market. And then where would those people go next? They would go into gig work. It just makes sense that that would happen. Now, obviously, that's a speculation, but I'm just using logic there to kind of predict that. And also some of the stories that have come out recently about Uber drivers that are just sick of the amount of people signing up for Uber. The competition between drivers has got so heated that they actually went on strike. It was over competition and better pay and benefits. So it's kind of crazy. And a lot of people obviously didn't go on strike on that because they can't afford to. So anyway, if you look at private sector employees year over year, it's up, but public sector employees surpassing private sector. You've just got to think about the job growth that is public sector employees. We've been through it before, guys. It is absolutely insane. We're the highest in the G7 when it comes to public sector employees. This economy is a facade of government jobs, essentially. That's what people don't understand or realize. So anyway, self-employed up 38,000 in 1 month. That is something of note. So if we get into industry by industry, goods producing sector down year over year, 42,000. So people aren't spending much money on goods and services. You've got agriculture down 33,900. That's not a good sign. You got natural resources, which is, pretty much flat. You've got utilities, which is pretty much flat as well. You've got construction year over year down slightly, manufacturing that is pretty much flat as well. And then you've got the services producing sector. And this is really interesting because this makes sense in my head. You've got a lot of jobs that were created here, and probably a lot of these jobs are vulnerable because if you think about what happened in the economy over the past 4 years, you first of all saw the goods producing sector that exploded in the bullwhip effect because everybody was buying stuff on Amazon. People weren't traveling. Everybody was stuck at home and everybody was ordering stuff online. So there was an explosion in the goods producing sector. The supply chains got all wrecked. And we saw that happen in multiple economies, not just here in Canada. After that, when things finally got more free again, when we finally got our freedom back, although not entirely, and then essentially as things got more free again, when we were allowed out of our cages again after what happened in the pandemic, what did you see happen? There was an explosion in the people going to services. It was the services sector that was now booming because nobody was doing services for the 2 years. They were all doing goods online, all that stuff, and then it all went to services. So this makes sense in my mind that a lot of that job growth would go over to the services sector, but that does not insulate it from what's about to happen to the economy and what is happening to the economy, because the economy is really not growing at all and it's utterly imploding when you really look at the nuances of the data. So transportation and warehousing is up, which is bizarre, and maybe some of you will let me know in the comments on that one because it's up over 100,000 year over year. But if you think about it, I've heard from so many people in the comments who work in this sector and it's the complete opposite of what I'm hearing from them. So I am confused on that one. You've got finance, insurance, real estate, rental and leasing, which is practically flat. Professional, scientific, and technical services is up. Educational services up. Obviously, that's tied into the government as well. More government jobs created. Healthcare and social assistance. Again, this is also pretty much government in Canada, and that's up, although we do need a lot more healthcare jobs to deal with the massive population growth that we're going on right now. And even this is just not enough when you break it down province by province. And then you've got public administration jobs at the bottom here, and of course they are up. So it's really interesting what's going on when you really break it down into the nuance and you look at what's actually going on. Because, you know, if you were just looking at essentially these headlines, you'd be saying, okay, things aren't that bad right now. Things are pretty good in the economy. The economy's heating up again. Maybe it's time to jump back into the housing market. And you would think that. But when you actually get into the nuances of the report, you realize that's not the case at all. And once again, it's just more government, more and more government. That's what we continue to see with these reports. And it's just an alarming thing. If you are looking for another video to watch that is very similar to this one, I would highly recommend you check out that video there. If you're looking for a VPN, go to expressvpn.com/marketmania. Use a VPN to get around Bill C-11, to get around Trudeau's Online Safety Act. And I will see you in the